Hey, Jim. How are you? I didn't see you come in. Let me take a picture. Get out of here, will you? Well, good evening, everyone. It's a delight to see all these smiling faces here. Welcome to the third annual New Canaan Library Memoir Writing Workshop public event, or sometimes called Authors on Stage. Is that the term we use? Authors on Stage? Before we begin, I want to send a note of thanks to a few folks here. First of all, to the New Canaan Library for sponsoring these events and for sponsoring our workshops, which have been running now for 1 year. This is our third year, but we had 10 months under our belt this year, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. I want to thank Cindy Leahy for being such a strong proponent of the memoir writing process. Cindy's been there right from the very beginning and has been a real catalyst and a facilitator for our programs. And where did Lori go? Oh, Lori's in the back here. Lori, a very special note of thanks to Lori Eflin, who's our editor-in-chief, done a superb job with the books. Let's give it to Lori. And I was going to see if Nick...
He's taping us.
Oh, he's taping us, okay. Well, Nick is not here, but he's been reliable. Every one of our sessions, he comes down, he sets the table up, sets the chairs up, gets the refreshments laid out for us. He takes good care of us. So when he comes in, I'll just refer you to him now. No, he's not in the back. Okay, well, as I mentioned, this is the third year of our workshop series. And for the last 10 months, a group of very distinguished memoir writing, aspiring memoir writers has been meeting. They deserve all the recognition that you can possibly give a group. They have done the writing in between sessions. At each session, they share their readings with us. We've been sharing with each other our personal life stories from early childhood, adolescence, grown-up experiences. We've sort of become a family, haven't we? Yeah. We know so much about each other, and so much is so admirable. And I think we're looking forward to continuing that. The library has suggested that they be willing to do it another year, so we are going to come back in September. The second Thursday of each month, Lori, is that still good? At 10 o'clock, from 10 to noon. We're going to be continuing, and we'll go for 10 months, and we hopefully will have another event with the help of God and everybody stays healthy to do it again. And I also want to acknowledge Barbara Jeffries, who's sitting in the back there. Barbara's from the New Canaan Inn, and the New Canaan Inn has been participating in our program. They have 4 authors in the book right now, but they were not able to make it today. But Barbara, we give them our very best regards. And Lori, did you want to say anything about the book? Okay. If you get a chance, if you get a chance to browse, you can look at her work product. It's a great job. Now we're going to go very informally. We're going to invite each of our readers. There'll be about 15 of you to get up and introduce yourself. You can say where you live, and maybe introduce what you're going to read, and then read it. Everybody has promised they're going to try hard to keep it to within 4 minutes. And that should give us about an hour and 20 minutes of wonderful reading time. So we started alphabetically, but we'll use the technique that we've used at our workshop sessions. And it would be sort of who would like to begin, and then we can go in that kind of sequence. But first, before we begin with the readers, we have Cindy is going to read the dedication that she has written for the book for a good friend of all of ours. And I won't say who it is, but Cindy, would you like to read the dedication for us?
Before I begin, I want to say it's truly an honor to be here this evening and to have collectively participated in creating this book, Writing Your Life 2012, and to have shared with all the writers their lives, experiences, and families in the memoir writing workshops over the past 3 years, actually. So this year, we would like to dedicate our book to Sid Greenberg, New Canaan's photographer. As Ansel Adams said, There are always two people in every picture, the photographer and the viewer. My favorite morning of the week, Thursday morning, was determined long before our wonderful memoir writing group became a staple on the second Thursday of each month here at the New Canaan Library. Thursday mornings meant that my friends Sid and Bev Greenberg would pop in and brighten my day. If it was Thursday, then Sid was looking for something to read. He would tell me he was stealing books. If it was Thursday, then maybe Sid would be sneaking around and taking candid shots of the staff, the building, and the patrons. We have some wonderful photographs that Sid has taken over the years. For many years, a special event at the library was documented in photos by Sid, and with his creative mind, as always in action, he snapped away, catching the powerful world of libraries in a glorious display. Sid shared stories of his experiences during World War II in China with me and helped me develop a wonderful oral history program at the Lapham Community Center during the New Canaan Library Summer Read 2010, World War II and the Holocaust. He and his war bride Beverly shared their personal stories with their friends, neighbors, and the broader community of readers. Sid shared stories of being a justice of the peace and the lives he brought together as husband and wife. He was a born storyteller, a comedian, an artist, a photojournalist, an amazing photographer, and my friend. The Writing Your Life Anthology 2012 is dedicated to the memory of this wonderful and talented man, who is a joy to everyone who is fortunate enough to have had their lives touched by him. Thank you.
Before we begin, I just want to mention one thing. The PowerPoint that you're looking at now is the creation of Lori Iflin, and she's taken all of the photographs and the images from the book and put them in a PowerPoint scan here. So what you're seeing up here now is all taken from Lori's book. So we'll begin as we do, as we have done with our typical sessions, and we usually say, who would like to begin? And then we can go either semi-alphabetical or whatever order you'd like to go. And who would like to begin? First reading. Okay, good. Come on, Sandy.
This way I can relax.
Okay, good.
Good evening. My name is Sandra Mark Sagardel. Most of my friends call me Sandy. I was born and grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I relocated to Stamford, Connecticut in 1967, and I've had a number of reincarnations since then. I've taught, I've done educational consulting, I worked for a hedge fund manager, very interesting, and I'm currently a grants technician for the city of Stamford. And I want to thank Roger and Cindy and Lori and all of the wonderful, wonderful people that have brought such joy to my life with this memoir class. I'm going to share with you a piece that is entitled The Visit. It pertains to a trip that my husband and I took in November of 2011 when we went out to visit family. I visited my sister last week. It had been 2 years since my last trip to Southern California, and I needed to catch up. Leaving the strange weather events of Connecticut, I envisioned a respite of fun in the sun while being with family. Unfortunately, Connecticut oddities became California oddities, with portions of Orange County buffeted by Santa Ana winds, with peak velocities of 90 miles per hour, the strongest in a decade. Trees fell like dominoes, electric power was non-existent in several municipalities, rendering travel difficult or nearly impossible. California freeways present challenges on an ongoing basis, with specific roads perpetually resembling parking lots. The situation does not bode well when motorists are told to remain at home and don't travel. Reaching my destination in Whittier, approximately 45 miles northeast from my brother's home, was not going to be easy. With several days remaining before Returning home, a date was selected with no room allowed for a change in plans. The day dawned sunny and clear, winds had diminished to a gentle breeze, and travel was thankfully uneventful. After my lengthy absence, I was looking forward to sharing news and gossip of family and friends. Having visited my sister's son and daughter-in-law the week prior, I shared how great they looked, the success of their chosen professions, strides made in decorating their first home, and how welcomed we were during our all too short time together. News of my sister's daughter included a travelogue, since the family free spirit was leading a group of adventurers to Cambodia and Vietnam before heading solo to Thailand. Being a Facebook aficionado, there was much to recount from her daily journals and photos forwarded from exotic locales. An update of my brother and his family, and of course my husband, kids, their spouses, and most beloved grandsons poured from my lips. Gossip focused on our 85-year-old uncle having auditioned for the reality show The X Factor, and now suing Simon Cowell for a laundry list of grievances. If you have an inquiring mind, merely Google high marks for details. Like all families, we run the gamut from relatively sane to somewhat bizarre, each bringing a unique flavor to the mix. My husband generously made himself scarce, allowing me privacy and times to impart what I needed to say. I talked at length and eventually paused as tears began to flow. Slowly at first, and followed with the intake of great gulps of air, I crouched closer to the ground and gently fingered a headstone. Whittier is home to Rose Hill Memorial Gardens, the final resting place of my sister Lynn, who died on July 21st, 2001, shortly after her 55th birthday. As adults, even after she relocated to California in 1965, and I made my home in Connecticut, we spoke continuously of spending our golden years together. This was not to be. My brother and I cherish our memories and will indulge my ongoing visits to catch up. Oh, the stories we could tell. Rituals remained to be accomplished before I took my leave. The grass trimmed, headstone washed, I stood to recite the Kaddish, the Jewish memorial prayer in which the greatness of God is extolled for what I believe is heartfelt gratitude for having shared a beautiful life with those who no longer walk the earth. I placed small, smooth stones on the grave, confirmation of my visit, and recited the names of those she cherished and cherished her in return. Additional stones were left for those who joined the family since her death, knowing fully how she would have welcomed them. My husband asked if I wanted a picture, and I said yes. Many may find my behavior and all it entails strange, but I offer no apology or explanation. For me, the moments bring a soothing balm to my soul and nurture my belief that our unspoken and unbroken connection and love remain. Walking away, I looked back, whispered, Lahithra Oat, not goodbye, Linny, be back soon. Epilogue. Lucas Jordan Laszlo was born to my daughter Jody and son-in-law Jeffrey on March 10, 2012. In linking the generations one to another, it is the tradition for Jews of Eastern European descent to name their child in memory of a beloved family member. On the day of his Brit Milah, his ritual circumcision, the Hebrew and English names he will carry in life were announced for the first time. God willing, Lucas, named in memory of my sister, will grow to emulate her humanity, courage, fierce loyalty to family, friends, and community. He will know of her through stories we will share, the photos we will view, and our laughter and tears. His is a glorious legacy.
Hello, my name is Jordan Sabone. I'd rather speak without the microphone. This. Oh. Yeah. Everyone hear my voice all right? Okay. Okay, this one is titled A Writer's Life for Me. As I glanced through the spaces of the rails in my crib, I saw a wall of books. Children's authors signed many of them. Days of my childhood were spent gazing inside the covers and listening to my parents read stories. I would always escape from my crib by running and climbing out, and I would go over to the bookcases and grab some books to read. However, my parents feared that I would injure myself and decided to donate the crib to charity and replace it with a mattress. Thus, I earned the freedom to pick books and look at them in my own bed. Over the years, we donated outgrown books to libraries and schools. Yet, no matter how many we gave away, we could not prevent the book collection from steadily increasing. When I was about 3 years old, my parents went to meet Bernard Weber, one of my favorite authors, who wrote Lyle Lyle Crocodile series. Groups of children's authors were signing their latest books at Books of Wonder, New York City's largest independent bookstore, which was dedicated solely to children's stories. Bernard Weber was among them that day. As soon as I noticed Mr. Weber seated at a long table with the other authors, I ran up to him. A picture was taken with me sitting in his lap. "I love your stories," I exclaimed. He smiled as he answered, "I'm very happy to see you. I have a grandson who is your age." Mum shook his hands, purchased an armful of books, and snapped our picture. Next to him sat another author, whose nameplate bore an unfamiliar name. She was a young woman with shoulder-length blonde hair and long bangs. Her accent was British, and she explained to us that this was her maiden voyage to America. She attempted to sell her books, which were very popular in the UK. Only 2 books had been published in the series at the time. "What's the story about?" inquired my mother, as she looked at the book's jacket, which bore a picture of a boy with dark hair and thick glasses. The young author explained the subject of her novel, which clearly upset my mother. She quickly placed the book back in the pile. "I don't think my son is old enough for your books, but I wish you well with your tour." She smiled and shook hands with the shy author. We did not buy any books from this unknown author, and as we exited, my mother rolled her eyes, shook her head, and said, "Who the heck in America would read a novel like this?" The author's name was J.K. Rowling. Needless to say, my mother regrets her refusal to purchase the first printing editions of the Harry Potter series, which at the time included only Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone and Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, first 2. Today, these books list for several thousand to over 15,000 on eBay. 5-figure sum. Those books would have contributed very well to Jordan's college and graduate school education, lamented my father many years later. Over the years, I met dozens of famous authors. When I was 4, I wrote letters to Esfir Slobodkina, the author of Caps for Sale. In her 90s at the time, she graciously mailed a box of autographed books to me, and in 2000, she designed her Long Island home into a mini museum with over 500 works of art. I saw her works of art before the museum was up to the public. Unfortunately, she died in 2002, just shy of her 94th birthday. At the time, I was 7. Meeting and speaking with published authors became a source of immense pleasure for me. Through the New Canaan Library's Authors on Stage program, I met such wonderful authors as Lieve Lindbergh, the daughter of Charles Lindbergh, the aviator, and we purchased a memoir of her famous parents called Under the Wing. We met John Grogan, the author of Marley and Me. We met Ari Fisher, White House press secretary under President George W. Bush. In his book, Taking Heat, he attempts to capture his experience of what happens behind the scenes in the White House. Mr. Fisher signed his book with the following inscription: "Anything your heart desires will be yours." Very memorable. And in the audience, my mother remarked, "One day you will be on stage speaking about your book. Your books will line the shelves of many libraries and bookstores." Thus, here I am at New Canaan Library's Authors on Stage program telling an audience a chapter of my life. I hope to continue writing and to become a published author, making it clearly a writer's life for me.
Good evening. Does everybody hear me? Okay. My name is Beverly Greenberg, and for all of those in my memoir writing class, they call me Bev. I am so pleased to be with you tonight. Special thanks to Cindy for dedicating this book to my husband, Sid. You will all see the dedication. It's beautifully written. It's on page 7. I have chosen another memoir to read, replacing the one in the book. My reason is this. This memoir is most meaningful as this special person is in the audience tonight. I don't know if you want me to point the person out, or you'll learn who it is. The story is, always listen to your children. In 1988, the year Bev retired from her position as principal secretary to Dr. Rubin of Center Elementary School, she had no clue as how she would spend the second chapter of her life. One weekend, she visited her son, Phil, in his loft apartment on 23rd Street, New York City. Phil was most curious to know what his mother planned to do for the next chapter of her life. Sid had retired 7 years earlier, but was busy with his photo work for the New Canaan Police Department, the local newspaper, the fire department, and the ambulance corps. Phil suggested she do some work in art. "No way," was her answer. "I don't think I could draw a straight line." Phil introduced me to pastels and asked me to draw something that we had seen that day visiting the Metropolitan Museum. With pastels in hand, I drew the skyline of Manhattan. Sid was so impressed with the drawing, he had it mounted and framed, and he presented this to me as a Mother's Day gift. It is hanging on the wall in our TV room. I must say it looks great. When the Senior Center of New Canaan offered a course in watercolor, Bev signed up, and she has attended classes for many years. Several of her paintings are hanging in her home, and many were given to family and friends as gifts. She learned to draw that straight line and much more. She will never be a Grandma Moses, but she will always be Grandma Bev. Thanks to our dear son, Phil, for his encouragement, his concern, and his caring. It definitely pays to listen to your children.
I'm a Barbara Buckley Holdridge, and for 47 years I have had a New Canaan phone number while living 250 feet into Wilton. So people think I don't know where I live, which is fine with me. I am a longtime volunteer at the New Canaan Library book sales, going back to the years when John Randolph was chairman. And at present, I price memoirs and biographies, and I always urge my memoir writing group and you to buy library copies of the many interesting memoirs. I grew up in a large Irish-American storytelling family, and back then it was the adults who told the stories, while my 3 younger brothers, my cousins, and I listened. Now we are the ones who tell the family stories when we are able to get together. Last Friday, it was my 13-year-old granddaughter who listened intently as my brother, visiting us from Illinois, and I traded stories about our World War II growing up in Taunton and West Yarmouth, Massachusetts. Some of those stories we had never told one another, and one story, it was only the second time I had ever discussed it with anyone. And then my husband and brother talked about their Army training and service. I like to have the feeling of having written, which is what I did for 25 years in my dream jobs as an adoption social worker for 2 nonprofit agencies here in Connecticut. My adoption home studies have gone all over the world and to many states in this country. According to Connecticut law, what I have written about the many wonderful families I worked with over the years must be kept for 99 years after the adoption is finalized. I treasure a comment relayed to me from a client's father in India that I had gotten it exactly right. I'd like to also say that the picture of me on page 43 was taken by Melvin Mason at one of the library book sales in 2011. And unfortunately, the final computer formatting process removed commas and spaces from my first essay, which is about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the second one, you've already seen the picture of my grand-twins.
So glad I joined, like a big family, and it's so good and friendly and helpful. I'm going to read my story. It's called The Girls. It all started on a beautiful day, late in September of 1964. I had fed my son Michael, and since it was such a nice day, I decided to take him for a walk. Before I left the house, I slipped the baby congratulation card my friend Paula had sent me in my pocket. It contained a note saying that she and Elaine had been meeting on Wednesdays with their new baby boys, and that I was welcome any Wednesday. I went into a drugstore, used the payphone to call Paula, and sure enough, they were there and seemed excited for me to stop by. Elaine had given birth to Richard in March of that year. Paula had Joey in May, and Michael was born in August. We had never seen each other's babies. We had been good friends in high school, and we had not seen each other in quite a while. We talked and talked, exclaimed over our babies, and compared notes. Time flew. We had to leave. We all had to prepare dinner. Elaine invited me to her house the following Wednesday, and that was the beginning of daytime weekly get-togethers, along with monthly evening get-togethers, birthday celebrations, dinners, and our annual picnic. It has lasted 47 years. Paul, Elaine, and I looked forward to seeing each other. In no time at all, this little group had began to grow. Another friend, Jerry, who also lived close by, joined us with her baby girl, Dana. Elaine's sister, Gina, joined the group with Jeffrey, as did my friend Jeanette with her son, Anthony. And the youngest member of the group, she never let us forget it, was my sister, Carol, with her son, Wayne. Whoever had club on Wednesdays made lunch for everyone. It seems that our little group of children also grew rapidly. I went to have another son, Richard, and daughter, Jennifer. Paula had two more sons, John and Patrick, and after 3 boys, a little girl named Lara. She was named after the female star in Dr. Zhivago. Paula soon noticed that there wasn't something quite right with her. She was not developing the way the boys had, and she was a difficult baby. It would take many years for a diagnosis to be reached. In the meantime, Lara grew up mentally and physically challenged, but loved by everyone. Elaine had another son, Michael, who had the most beautiful long dark eyelashes that would fan out over his cheeks as he slept. Jerry had a second child, a boy named Tommy. On the same day that he was born, Tommy's grandfather, Jerry's father, suddenly passed away. We were all at my house celebrating my son Richard's 4th birthday when we reached the news. Joy and sadness intertwined. Our hearts went out to our friend and her family. Gina went on to have 2 daughters after Jeffrey, Kathy and Lori. Annette had 3 more children, a daughter named Lisa, another son they called Vincent, and a little girl, Michelle. Carol had a boy just 18 months after Wayne, who they named Andrew. Wayne and Andrew were both premature. Wayne did fine when he was born, but Andrew had problems. A short time after his birth, he was critical, and we all prayed he would make it. Andrew was a fighter. He not only survived, but turned out to be a very strong, spirited little boy with red hair and freckles. Then years later, a little girl, Caroline, was born to my sister Carol. We have a total of 21 children between us. This is a footnote. We lost our dear friend Gina on October 13th, 2008. She is sorely missed. She leaves a huge gap in our little group, the girls. She is missed not only for her delicious lunches, Jello, molds, and desserts, but also for the sweet, gentle, and understanding person that she was. Anyone who had the opportunity to talk with Gina felt better about themselves and any problems they might be having at the time. We all love Gina, and although she will be missed, she will live in our hearts forever.
I just had to add a note. Thank you so much, Pat. When we first met Pat and Elsie, it was about 3 years ago. I'm going to tell the truth. We had already had our sessions underway. This was about our 3rd or 4th month. We were at full house capacity. And these 2 wonderful ladies from Stanford came in, Elsie Ferrara and Pat Rinaldi, and they said, can they join the group? And I said, gee, you know, we're book solid. But you're free to stay here and just see what we do. And thanks to both of them, they stayed with it, have been with us ever since. And Elsie, Pat, we love you.
My name is Mark Magid. I live in West Norwalk. I don't have a New Canaan telephone number. I always thought that you were never too old to start writing memoirs, but after living with Jordan the last year or two, I find that you're never too young to start writing memoirs either. This is a story about how I discovered where Moses was saved. History is a serious business, but there are times when one accepts whatever is dished up because it's more fun that way. Case in point, in January 1974, shortly after the end of the October War between Israel and Egypt, I made my first visit to Cairo. It was a business trip, and the windows of the major buildings were still boarded up to protect against air raids. Avoiding first-day meetings, I hired a taxi, which, had it been a person, would have been characterized as extremely aged and very infirm. Notwithstanding its age and infirmities, the vehicle and its driver accomplished what I would have thought was impossible. It successfully navigated the Cairo streets, eventually depositing me on the far side of town, where I emerged onto Haret el-Yahui, Jews' Alley, the old Jewish quarter. 1,000 years ago, in the time of Maimonides, Haret el-Yehudi was a vibrant community, bubbling with the pursuits of commerce, science, medicine, religion, and philosophy. By the time of my arrival, it was reduced to a single unpaved, dirt-encrusted street. Its few remaining antiquated buildings barely hinted at a more illustrious past. Of commerce, there was none. Of daily life, none. A ghost quarter, except there was no sign of ghosts. In 1952, Egypt's president, Gamal Nasser, had nationalized the major industries and seized the properties of Egypt's Jews. Technically, it was called a sequestration. Whatever it was, it led to a repetition of the older, more historic Jewish exodus, only in this one, the waters of the Dead Sea did not part. What had been a thriving community of 75,000 Jews in 1948 had, by 1974, deteriorated to a handful of less than 100. My immediate objective in the quarter was to visit what had been one of its oldest synagogues, one which had ceased functioning many decades before. The taxi had dropped me in front of it. As I was about to make my entrance, an elderly caretaker approached. He beckoned to show me around, and I followed him into the synagogue. The interior was threadbare. Where once a congregation had sat, there was now only the barest of infrastructure. Old prayer books were scattered about, on a table, on chairs, on the floor, helter-skelter, supporting mounds of dust. They seemed to have found their final resting place. I tried to visualize what the synagogue might have looked like in the glory days of Haret el-Yehudi. I also tried to ask the caretaker a few appropriate questions. I must have been straining, perhaps sensing the need to change the focus of my attention. He suddenly asked if I would like to see something very special. Why not? He beckoned me again, and we exited the synagogue and made our way towards its rear. Soon we found ourselves at the head of a dirt staircase, and I peered into what seemed to be total darkness. The caretaker led me slowly down the dirt steps and into a passageway. I could hear and then see a stream of water, gently flowing past the underpinnings of the synagogue. In the subterranean darkness, the caretaker leaned close to me. I could make out his finger, pointing as if for effect to the flowing stream. He then offered a bit of history. This is the spot, he said, the very spot where Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby Moses in the reeds, and then took him and raised him in her palace. In the face of such a precise disclosure concerning an event that allegedly took place perhaps 3,500 years ago, I responded with a mixture of amazement at the event itself, but also appreciation that the caretaker had taken me into his confidence by imparting to me such a fascinating tidbit of information. Feeling a necessity to keep the dialogue rolling a bit longer, I proceeded to ask several questions about the baby Moses, as well as about the comings and goings of folks in those early biblical days. I then reached into my pocket, withdrew a wad of local currency, which didn't add up to that much, thanked the caretaker profusely, and proceeded to complete my initiation into the ancient art of bakshish, a practice which is useful in consuming business transactions in Egypt, whether they be in business or otherwise, and whether they be large or small. The bakshish left the caretaker happy. It also did something for me. I came to consider it as an investment in a new kind of truth, a historical one. Having learned from the Bible the story of how Moses' mother, fearing the death of her firstborn at the hands of the Pharaoh, had hidden him in the reeds, where he ultimately was saved by an Egyptian princess and taken to be raised in the Pharaoh's palace, I had now acquired knowledge of, in fact, had actually seen the very spot in the waters where 3,500 years ago the basket that saved Moses actually had been placed. And Moses had been there. The knowledge, that knowledge has now become my contribution to the serious business of history. It is my personal link to Moses, and every year, with the celebration of Passover, I will be able to tell my grandchildren their grandchildren, exactly where Moses was found.
Hi, my name is Elsie Ferrara. I was born and raised in Stamford and have enjoyed this group for 3 years. And the piece I'm going to read is called The Kitchen Table. It's a piece of prose. Standing there, mute, saying nothing, antagonizingly silent, looking foolish. 5 empty chairs all standing around, looking at each other. We dressed them up in coats and jackets, persons now, looking at each other. It's comical, changing outerwear between acts. A catch-all, now this, now that. Heavy groceries when the kids are coming. Keys and mail when they are not. Now you need to be dusted, inanimate object that you have become. In the 70s, not a day passed that you were not used. An intrinsic part of life you were then. Now, decorum that a kitchen cannot be without. Oh, spilled milk and Cheerios. Oh, arguments of who touched what. Gone forever, except in this secret heart of mine. Oh, English muffin pizzas, elementary friends, banquets of hot dogs and beans, pushing away to run and play. Gone, silent and mute, you just stand there. Oak pedestal, surely you remember the kicking. Pressed wood chairs, you remember the picking. Supper, after a long wait and many just a minutes. Everyone finally in their places, reserved seats, season's tickets, just where you belonged. Am I the only one who remembers? The kitchen table, the style may change. In the past, I remember another kitchen table, formica and chrome with vinyl seats. This was home. Did my mother miss me? Gracefully, she slipped away, without ever letting on. Into the world of the living dead, she never penned a verse. Mama, I remember. Mama, I loved it so. Home is home, and home is where the kitchen table stands. We take our meals in the den now, he and I, at another table, never to be called the kitchen table. We hate to sit at a silent table, so for company we invite Montel or Ralph Penza. Think hard of the kitchen tables of bygone days. How many have you had? The sounds of favorite voices, the aroma of favorite foods.
The young women I call my own will grace this table and gather round again. On Wednesday night, I'll make that recipe from a long-forgotten friend. It is my good fortune to fulfill a fantasy. For an hour, they can be children and worry not. It was done for me, though not by flesh and blood. I thank the Lord that the table, that is just sleeping, will be awake once more. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Tillman. I've lived in New Canaan for almost 30 years, and we have a wonderful combination family, his, mine, and ours. My husband has 2 children. I have a son, and we have a 26-year-old daughter adopted from Korea. We have 2 little mini dachshunds, Colby and Lily. I have been taking notes and remembering all my life. And now, thanks to the really inspirational class, Writing Your Life, with Roger, I am actually writing my life. It just gives me so much pleasure and joy. This story goes way back past 1945. Oh my God. It's called M.O.M., also known as Margaret Ogilvy Magoon, my mom. My mother was born in 1922 during the Depression and grew up in rural Pennsylvania in a small hick town, her term, of Steelton, PA. She was named for her mother's older sister, Margaret Ogilvy Williamson. Young Margaret, my mother, developed a large aspirations fueled by her poor circumstances. My grandfather had lost his job as an engineer for Bethlehem Steel Company. In the living grew bleaker. She grew up a poor girl, again, her term, and admitted to us, her children, that she had occasionally taken a ketchup sandwich for lunch at elementary school. The aunt for whom she was named was a wealthy widow, and she funded her further education at the Siler School for Girls in Harrisburg, PA. There began the aspirations when a better life could be seen in the other girls. With blue-blooded young ladies all in attendance and some old money still evident, Peggy began to see a different kind of life was possible. After attending a 2-year college to study horticulture, she was motivated to climb out of her situation and move away from home. She left for New York City and began to work at Best & Company on Fifth Avenue. She got a job through connections she had made at her school and was thrilled to be in the big city at last, and eventually she met my father, Harold Clark Strong, Jr., a striking naval officer and a gentleman. The future grew rosier, and she became engaged to the handsome Yale graduate. Please pinch me now. The first baby was a boy christened Harold Clark Strong III, was born prematurely and quickly developed the dreaded hyaline membrane syndrome, and he died a few days later. Their second infant, also born premature, but survived, to be our older sister, Anne. Then somehow, during a week's furlough in San Francisco in April 1945, my parents got pregnant with their last baby. It turned out to be a twofer, me and my twin sister. Born by C-section, first came Mary, me, and then 1 minute later came Selina. We are named for our 2 grandmothers and baptized on the spot, as the outcome for her survival did not look positive. We were each weighed about under 4 pounds, and although our heads were a fair size, when the nurse unwrapped the snug blankets, our legs looked like 2 little stalks of cooked asparagus, as my mother used to say, like my twin neck figures side by side. We remained in the hospital for a month, and for show, spent our first Christmas in large surgical stockings with a red bow tied loosely around. We got to come home right after New Year's. As my parents walked out of the hospital on that bright, shiny day, each carrying an identical baby bundle, the floor nurse took out her little scissors and clipped off the tiny bead bracelets that had been our identification in the hospital. It was wartime, and everything was in short supply, including those little name beads. My mother was horrified. She felt she needed to know who was who. She wanted to be sure we were who we were supposed to be. So she clutched the baby she held tight. It was me. We arrived back at her parents' apartment, and she bundled me up to her bed, where she carefully unwrapped her present. She made my dad hold my sister and not put her down until she found a small olive on the skirted vanity table and proceeded to brush ruby red nail polish on the tiniest big toe. I always had red polish on my 2 big toes for many, many years after that. When it began to fade away, it would be reapplied religiously. until the day I could say, I, Mary Twong, Mary Strong, at 20 months old. That's my story.
Good evening. My name is Pauline Brody, and I've been with the group since its inception under Roger's leadership. This year we were to write based on the themes of food and travel. And my story tonight is on food, learning to bake. I have to admit, baking does not come naturally to me. Now, cooking is a different matter. In Chinese cooking, one has to consider how the dish will appeal to each of our five senses. Not only must the dish taste good, it must be attractive to look at, with bright colors, smell good, and have interesting, perhaps contrasting textures. Eating the food must be a total sensory experience, leaving one feeling mellow and happy. I like to analyze or guess what's in a dish. The ingredients and the flavorings used, the texture, the consistency of the sauce, how was it cooked, whether it was stir-fried, braised, baked, or broiled. Then I like to just experiment, often giving the dish a different twist. Perhaps substituting one type of meat for another, or one vegetable for another, or adding a different spice. I suspect I feel comfortable with cooking because my mom was a terrific cook, and I watched her often enough. She never used a recipe and frequently created new dishes. But baking, oh my gosh, you have to be so precise. You mix all the ingredients and pop it in the oven. How do you control what comes out? When cooking, I do not like to follow recipes or measure ingredients carefully. You would never suspect that I had been one time a chemistry major. Similarly, when baking, I prefer to go by feel, eyeballing, how much flour to use, how many eggs, a pinch of this, a pinch of that, how much liquids. I also like to use less fattening ingredients than Western recipes. So you can understand why my baked items are usually nothing to rave about, if they even taste anything like what they're supposed to. One time, when I was newly married, I asked my good friend Marianne, who was a very good baker, "Marianne, what's your secret?" She told me, "I always add a box of pudding mix to whatever I'm baking. It makes the cake especially soft and moist." And my husband really likes it. Taking that to heart, I tried her method. My husband was raised in Brooklyn. Being a good Brooklyn boy, he loved rich cakes, moist and soft. So I tried to impress Adrian that I could cook as well as bake. Bake as well as cook. I was trying to bake for the first time an angel food cake from a box mix. The ingredients listed on the box sounded healthy enough. No butter, no egg yolks. How could Betty Crocker go wrong? This was the time before there were demonstration videos. But I managed to beat the egg white until they were nice and firm and formed peaks, as the direction called for. The rest of the ingredients were mixed in a separate bowl. To make the cake especially soft and moist, I added Marianne's secret ingredient. The egg white was folded in gently to the batter, and the cake went into the oven. And I peeked through the glass door, and I saw the cake rise. Oh, the cover was nice and brown. When the time came, I took it out of the oven. allowed it to cool for a while. My parents were visiting, so we sat down to taste my creation. Horror of horrors. When I cut into the cake, there was a giant cavern underneath a thin, puffed crust. So as not to discourage me, Dad looked at it, took a bite, and said, this is a very interesting cake. And he promptly got up and left the table. Adrian laughed and said, I think angel food cake is supposed to be very light, not dense. That day, I learned one could not be too creative with baking.
Musa Salman, I live in Darien, and please forgive me if I sound too loud, because slowly I am going deaf. The title of my story is Pigeons and Beethoven's Musical Universe. I often ask myself, what is music and where does it come from? I am immensely fascinated by the latest scientific string theory, which proclaims that the universe is comprised of invisibly minute vibrating strings floating in space-time, and all elementary particles which shape our universe could be musical notes. I feel very fortunate to have been exposed to the music of the masters at an early age. My wife Lois also shared my interest, and going further in time, my two sons, Mark and David, also enjoyed classical music to the extent that my oldest son, Mark, became a concert pianist, studying at MIT and graduating from the Juilliard School of Music. At an early age, he undertook the monumental task of performing the entire 32-piano sonata cycle of the great master Ludwig van Beethoven. One day, he came to me with a marvelous idea, but quite challenging. He, along with one of Juilliard's prominent teachers, David Duval, wanted to film an analysis, discussion, and performance of the entire sonata cycle. David would be the host and commentator, and Mark the piano player. After selecting the filming crew and having the script written by Mark and David, I went to see Father Percy, the pastor of the Calvary Church in downtown New York City, known for its marvelous acoustics. He was very gracious and agreed to rent the church to us to do the filming. When the technicians went to the church to set the stage for filming, the sound engineer opened the windows and left them open for next day's shoot. Cameras, action, go, and the filming proceeded. Suddenly, when Mark began performing the sonatas, we heard the sound of flapping wings. We looked up, and behold, we saw a few pigeons anchored in the ceiling in various spots. Thank God, nobody here. Stop action and cameras, the director yelled. Some of the technicians attempted to chase the pigeons out the windows, but surprisingly, they resisted. So we had no choice save shooting them down or continuing with the filming. When Mark began to play the melodic and heart-generous second movement of the Sonata No. 1, something startling happened. The pigeons began humming along. So Mark was compelled to repeat the performance of that movement, hoping his second try would be pigeonless. But these birds were stubborn and kept humming during both takes. On the next day, when listening to the tapes, we were delighted the humming of the pigeons was hardly discernible. The filming went to print on 2 DVDs, Volume 1 and 2, entitled Beethoven and His 32 Piano Sonatas, A Musical Universe. The reviews were splendid. Many libraries in the United States and Canada acquired them. Both the New Canaan and the Darien libraries have them. WLIW, Channel 21, New York, aired Volume 1 4 times. So until we resume filming, Mark and David, along with few pigeons, have left their footprints in the history of one of mankind's greatest accomplishments. Thank you very much.
I'm Jim Schlump, and first off, I want to thank Roger for getting us started. I think many of us have tried to start memoirs and always hit a dead-end street or something, but Roger came up to me at Senior Men's Club, suggested I might enjoy this, so I came over in February, and I think it opened up a whole new world, and I want to thank you, Roger. You've been very helpful. My writing tonight is entitled Meeting a New Father-in-Law. While a sophomore studying civil engineering at Purdue University, a Phi Delta Theta fraternity brother asked me to go on a blind date with a Delta Gamma sister of his date. What sold me on the idea was that she was supposed to be tall. That was an important criterion. I think we both had a good time. I began to ask her out for some more dates. Her name was Susie Cogleiser. Now that's a natural fit for a name like Schlumpf. She was enrolled in the School of Pharmacy, was 1 year ahead of me. As I got to know her, I learned she was smart. She was involved in a lot of school activities. That summer, I had to attend an obligatory civil engineering summer school. There were 2 courses that required actual experience. Good old CE 11, Topographic Engineering, and CE 12, Route Survey. After the camp was completed, I returned to my home in Evansville, Indiana. Susie lived 250 miles south in Fayetteville, Tennessee. With my parents' permission, I arranged one weekend to borrow their car and drive down to see her and to meet her parents. Well, it was a fun and interesting visit. Her father prided himself on outdoor cooking. He was using outdoor charcoal grills before it was a thing to do. At that time, charcoal grills were primitive by comparison to today's models. They were small with few features and very light construction. The technique that he had developed was to soak some pieces of hickory, put it into water, and then to put it on the hot coals as the meat cooked. There was no doubt about it that it added some flavor that was really different. The cooking was quite a ritual with him. There was a time for the charcoal to be ready, a time for the meat to cook on each side, and a time to add the soaked hickory wood. He convinced me. In 1951, Susie graduated from Purdue and returned to her parents' new home. Their apartment was the 8th floor apartment of a high-rise apartment building called Stonestown in San Francisco, California. She had found work as a pharmacist trainee until such time as she could pass the state of California license test. Meanwhile, during the second semester, I contracted infectious mononucleosis, and I had to drop out of school. So to make up for the lost class, I had to go to summer school. Since I had not seen Susie for quite some time, I arranged to go to California to visit her. Together with 3 other Purdue students, we carpooled in a drive to the West Coast, dropping one passenger off in the Los Angeles area, before we proceeded to San Francisco. Susie and her parents were planning a great dinner for my welcome. Their apartment had 2 floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a magnificent view. There was a small porch for her father's grill. I could now call him Cog. He put a huge steak on the grill together with his soaked hickory chips. While the meat cooked, we enjoyed a cocktail in the living room. As I looked out the picture windows, I could see several large fire engines racing down the highway. I wonder where they're going, I said. With no answer, we continued with our cocktails. Shortly thereafter, there was a knock on the door. The hallway was filled with firemen. They were responding to a fire call from all the smoke that had been seen. Cog could not have been more embarrassed. He got a coffee can, filled it with water, and doused a perfectly good fire, and he shortened the cooking with a juicy steak. In his haste, the steam from the water on the hot coals burnt his hands. Not terribly seriously, but enough to ruin the festivities of the evening. But it did provide a memory that we will never forget. 1952, her family moved south to Whittier, California. We were now engaged. For my spring break from Purdue, I flew to California. Cog was bound and determined to show me that he could cook a good steak. So one day we went to his favorite butcher shop. He was on a first-name basis with everyone in the store. He described to the butcher in painstaking detail what he wanted in this cut of meat. The butcher disappeared to the back room. Shortly thereafter, he emerged with a huge chunk of beef. Unfortunately, it was not what Cog had in mind. But fortunately, the butcher had the meat in his hands and not the carving knife. After much give and take, the butcher repeated and proceeded to bring out a new carving piece. This time it met Cog's approval. When we got home, Cog prepared a huge bed of charcoal in his grill. After he lit the fire, he returned to the kitchen. He took a huge bottle of French's yellow mustard and absolutely coated the entire piece of meat with it. Next, he hand-packed ice cream rock salt, chunks into the mustard. Not a pretty sight. By then, the coals were the required light gray, and they were glowing. He made a hole in the coals. He dropped in the meat right in the middle of the coals. Slowly, he raked the remaining coals over to cover the top of the meat. He walked away and said it was time for cocktails. Perhaps a half an hour later, he brushed away the coals, retrieved the meat, placed it on the carving board to rest. 20 minutes later, he began slicing the servings of beef. It was cooked to perfection. One would never expect such a wonderful flavor given all the coverings, but it was memorable. So outdoor cooking will always remember my father-in-law, Cog. I would add a postscript to this. My wife, Susie, who's accompanying me tonight, Susie and I just celebrated just earlier this month our 60th wedding anniversary.
Hi, my name is Kate McBride-Tenney. I am originally from California. I've been here for 14 years, and I'm very happy to be here. My piece is called Werewolves of California. I'm sorry, it isn't called that. Threw me. It's called Werewolves of Guatemala. It was a simple enough plan. In retrospect, I'm not even sure why we were so eager to save a few dollars. I guess at the time, it seemed unfair that we arrived just 2 days after the national park raised their entrance fee from $1 to $6. My fiancé Andrew and I groaned a little bit about it, and a helpful Brit thought he would offer up this handy solution to offset some of the cost. Take the trail that ran parallel to, but just outside of, Tikal National Park for about 2.5 miles. You'll come to a few, maybe 3 smallish structures off to your right. After the last one, you'll see a small path off to your left. Don't take this path. Continue walking about 500 yards and you'll see another path, less visible than the first, off to your left again. Don't take this path either. Another 100 yards or so, you'll see a fallen tree. It is beyond this tree that you'll see a third path off to your left. It is even less visible than the first 2, so don't miss this one. And this is the one that you'll want to take. Cut into the jungle from this path and you will enter Guatemala's glorious national park, Tikal, for free. How could we go wrong? A little adventure, I thought. Sounds fun. Just mind the gorillas, the expat said at the end. Gorillas? I didn't know there were gorillas in Guatemala, I said without a hint of blonde in my hair. He chuckled. Not gorillas, gorillas. Armed rebels still roam the countryside, even rogues from the army. Wouldn't they love a young, delicious couple to kidnap and boost their coffers? Andrew and I glanced at each other warily. He laughed. Don't worry. They usually stay pretty well tucked into the jungle. My mind did wander back to my friend Mercury, a truly emancipated soul introduced to me by my friend Laura Sullivan. He was a healer and massage master, beautiful and sensual and unrestricted beyond anyone I had ever known. He had single-handedly developed a totally inspired way of cutting hair, and Laura had gone to make a successful career using and teaching his method. Mercury went on to travel the world as his free spirit commanded him. He met a tragic end as he meditated alone in a Guatemalan jungle by the point-blank bullet fired from the end of a rifle belonging to a misguided rebel who happened upon him. So I did understand some of the dangers of the jungle, especially in the year 1990, well within the times of violent turmoil in that country. But off we set, glib about any danger that might befall us. We could only guesstimate the distance. That was one problem. And what exactly constituted a structure? That was another. The other very obvious hurdle which presented itself pretty early on was that we were in a jungle, and there were, well, fallen trees everywhere. I think those might have been the structures he was talking about, I offered about 20 minutes in. No, we haven't gone far enough yet, Andrew countered. We continued walking. After another 20 minutes, we encountered another sort of structure. Do you think that's it, Drew? I'm not sure. He sounded even less so. We kept walking. After another 20 minutes or so of walking, I said, I'm getting kind of nervous. Don't you think we should cut in? I feel like we've gone too far. Well, we haven't seen any obvious paths, Drew maintained. Well, we haven't seen any obvious structures either, or any obvious anything. Still, I think we should just pick a non-obvious path and cut in. We've definitely walked well over 3 miles, don't you think? I was really starting to get nervous. Yeah, I guess you're right. We cut to the left on what looked like it could have been a path a long time ago. We were pretty sure we were going in the right direction. The path we were on curved a bit, but it seemed to straighten back out. After a while, this path got smaller and fainter until it disappeared into the jungle floor and into the floor of the jungle entirely. The toucans screamed from above and seemed to be saying, "Turn back, turn back." Scurrying things rustled the leaves just outside our view, disappearing before we got close enough to see what they were. Still, there was plenty of daylight to help guide our way, but the brush on the jungle floor started to get denser until we had to slow our gait to step over it. We had been walking for at least 2 hours. It was certainly long enough. We both knew that. Then it happened. It was one sound, but it was a horrendous sound, a roar. An animal, surely. But I stopped in my tracks. My heart leapt, but there was nowhere to run. Another roar, fierce and angry. What was that? I managed to get out from my tightening throat. I don't know, Andrew answered stiffly. I tried to imagine what kind of ferocious animals lived in the jungle here. We were staying at the Jaguar Hotel, so certainly there were jaguars. I offered up that suggestion. I'm not sure, Andrew said, and we stopped walking. The roars continued and got louder and seemed to be coming from every side of us. I felt unsteady as I looked around us to try to find the source of that terrifying sound. I surveyed our situation. Did we have any food that might have attracted it to us or might distract it away from us? Did we have any weapons? Then I remembered Andrew had his knife in his backpack. Andrew, pull out your knife. If it attacks us, then at least we'll have a fighting chance. He hesitated. Please, Andrew, please, hurry. I was near tears as the beastly roars were getting louder and nearer, but their cause still remained invisible. He leaned down to look through his pack. I felt faint from my pounding heart and dizzy as I turned in circles to try to see this monster. I didn't think it was any type of cat, honestly. It was louder than a cat and more ferocious. It sounded like a dinosaur. And yes, that's exactly what I would imagine a dinosaur would sound like. I felt like the backpacking characters, Jack and David in the movie Werewolves of London, when they first came upon that horrible beast as it circled them in the dark. But now, to my horror, there was a second screeching roar, wild and deafening. They sounded like they were fighting, like two Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaurs battling, fighting over us, their prey. I was sure I heard even a third and possibly fourth. Their hollers thundered as if they were right in front of us, yet I could not see a thing. Had we stumbled upon some ancient path leading us into a time warp and somehow a prehistoric scene? Or was it a supernatural beast, not of this world at all, now or ever? Clearly, my mind wasn't working properly. My fight or flight survival mechanism had directed the blood flow to my fighting muscles since fleeing was not an option and directly away from my brain. I had never been so scared in my life as I was in that moment. I felt woozy from it. Andrew finally found the knife, which I made him hold out at the ready, though his guitar-playing grip hardly inspired confidence in his fighting ability. I knew if these beasts decided to close in, we were cat food. The pure decibel levels of these atrocious sounds were ear-splitting. If they got any louder, they would be inside my head. I was too scared to even cry. My fight response wouldn't even allow for an extra shed tear. Suddenly, I saw a color that didn't belong in the jungle, bright red. My eyes tried to adjust and decipher it. It was far away, but yes, I think it was a shirt, a person. A person! I ran as fast as I could, and Andrew tried to keep up. There was a few people gathered down below on an actual trail, all looking up. When I reached them, I immediately felt safety in our numbers. Perhaps together we could fight off these beasts. But they had smiles on their faces and not a look of terror among them, though they no doubt heard these same sounds as I. They were pointing up into the trees. I looked and saw high above me dark shapes jumping and roaring. What are they? I said weakly. Howler monkeys, said a man excitedly. The long, loud sound that followed, that was my deep sigh of relief, exhale of relief. A few months later, I went into a garage sale of a documentary filmmaker. As I leafed through his curious items, I found a video about howler monkeys. I held it up to him without a word. Howler monkeys, he said with the wide eyes and a thick Aussie accent. The scariest sounding animal on the planet. Indeed, I smiled knowingly, this planet or any other.
Well, would you permit me to be the anchorman and read a brief piece? I had published my memoir in 2008. So I'd like to read just an excerpt from one of the chapters. It's called Sorrento. Carolyn's in the back of the room. Carolyn and I loved our first trip to Italy in 1987. We promised each other we'd go back again, which we did 5 years later. In October 1992, we flew into Rome and took in all of the tourist sites. Then we drove south to Sorrento, where we had one of the most memorable experiences of our lives. The town of Sorrento, located south of Naples, is in one of the most beautiful areas of Italy, facing north across the Bay of Naples. Upon arrival, we booked into a pension on a cliff overlooking the town and the harbors. It was a fabulous view. Carolyn's mother, Jenny Russo, was born in Sorrento on March the 11th, 1908, and came to the United States at the age of 4. On our last full day in Sorrento, I put on my genealogist hat and decided to go ancestor hunting, which proved to be an experience that exceeded all of our expectations. The first stop was at the library. We assumed the librarian might speak some English, which he did, so we explained our quest. He told us that historical records were kept in a town hall a few blocks away. When we asked for directions, he offered to take us there. We asked him who would tend to the library, and he said, "No problem. I'm the librarian, and I have the key." So he asked the patrons to leave, locked up, and escorted us to the town hall. We got to the municipal office in the middle of the morning, and there was a long line of people waiting to transact their business. The librarian took us straight to the head of the line and introduced us to the clerk. He explained that Carolyn's mother was born in Sorrento, and we were looking for any details they could offer. The clerk said it would take a few minutes, and he went back into the archives. Much to our delight, the clerk came back with an authentic stamped copy of Jenny's birth certificate, which listed her place of birth as number 6 Via Casala. When we asked if there was any record of Carolyn's mother's parents, the clerk said he would check, and he went back into the archives. It took him quite some time to return, and we were getting concerned that he might have forgotten us. But he finally came back wearing a great big smile. We couldn't believe what he had found for us: an official copy of Jenny's parents' marriage certificate and both of their birth certificates. These were Carolyn's grandparents, Vincenzo Russo and Carolina Mastalone, after whom she was named. We were so excited. We paid for the certificates and thanked the clerk for his help. After lunch, we asked a policeman for directions to Via Casala, the street on which Carolyn's mother was born. He pointed to the general vicinity up the mountain, so we got back into our car and headed in that direction. We roamed around a while, then decided we had to ask someone for help. We stopped at a small pension, and a young clerk greeted us in the lobby. When we asked her if she knew where Via Casala was, she told us it was just beyond the cemetery. We thanked her and were about to leave when she said, "Wait, I'll take you there." We didn't want to impose, but she insisted. She was going to the cemetery to put fresh flowers on her grandmother's grave, which she did every day. We followed her car at the cemetery, and she showed us the street we were looking for. We couldn't believe it when we came to number 6 Via Casala, the house that Jenny was born in. When we got home, we sat with Jenny, told her of our experiences in Sorrento, and gave her a photo of the house she was born in. She was very touched and almost began to cry. As we think back on our wonderful experience, we deeply appreciate the charm and magnetism reflected in one of the most famous love songs in the world, Torna a Sorrento, meaning return to Sorrento. The sentimental Neapolitan love song invites you to return to Sorrento to see its beauty, the sea, the mermaids, the gardens, and the flowers. We could hardly wait to go back again, and in 2006, 14 years later, we did.
Writing Your Life, the brainchild of our leader, Roger Langevin, has truly been a life experience for all of us who have been involved in this endeavor over the past year. We thank Roger for his enthusiasm and dedication to helping us write about anything we want to write about, and for encouraging us when we seek guidance as well as awakening our memories. I have a book at home called The Book Lover's Birthday Book, and the book alerts the readers to writers who are born on each day of the year, and also produces quotes. So I looked at today's date, but unfortunately, on June 25th, George Orwell was born in 1903, and his quote is depressing. But on June 26th, Pearl Buck was born in 1892, and her quote is one which I think expresses our commitment to telling our stories. Remember, everyone has a story to tell, and Pearl Buck said, "It's no simple matter to pause in the midst of one's maturity, when life is full of function, to examine what are the principles which control that functioning." And examine we do as we write and share. So we, the members of the Memoir writing group, would like to thank Roger and present him with a gift from all of his students for enabling us to examine and to write.
Thank you all for coming. And for those of you who are interested, we'll see you on the second week of September, on Thursday, second Thursday in September at 10 a.m. 2 hours. Thank you all for coming.